Some argue that a gene variant linked to increases in our desire for new experiences, risky behavior, and adventure is why some people gravitate to motorcycles. There are even genetic testing kits being advertised to bikers in order to find out if you have this gene for the low price of $150. Is the reason we overcome the fear that so many others have around motorcycles is because of biology that demands we get out there and ride? I was skeptical, to say the least, but I had to know for sure. So I read a bunch of the articles and then dug into the studies, and I was surprised by what I found. And I really want to share that with you today. At the end of this video, you're going to understand exactly what is this Wanderlust gene, why people are connecting it to motorcycles, and how much genetics plays a part in our passion for riding. I'm Alex, and here are some squid tips about the science of genetics.
Why do some of us travel to explore new locations, whilst others are happy to simply read a book in the sun? It's because 20% of us are genetically different. We have the DRD47R repeat gene on our 11th chromosome, the Wanderlust gene. We are driven inexplicably to explore. We need our daily fix of dopamine. We need to take risks, and we need adventure travel to feed our souls. We need the rush of opening the throttle and feeling the acceleration and power of the machine beneath us. From a very young age, I realized biking was in my blood.
There were really only 2 studies cited in any article I read about there being a biological motorcycle affinity. This 2016 article in Motorbike Writer, I see what you did there, nice, references one of them, and it states the following. If you love the thrills of motorcycles and the adventure of riding far and wide, it's probably because you were born with it in your genes. The reason is all very scientific and explained in a long-titled paper published in 1999 by 4 UC Irvine scientists. You like my nature documentary voice? I like it. Fuck you. Quick note. I find that when people hand-wave the cause of something, like they're doing here with this statement, it's all very scientific, that is generally a sign they don't really understand the cause themselves, and it leads me to be very skeptical of their claims. The scientists were trying to find links between dopamine receptor D4 and attention deficit disorder, but ended up finding that people with the DRD4 genes also tend to be thrill seekers and travelers. Long alleles of the DRD4 gene have been linked to novelty-seeking personality, hyperactivity, and risk-taking behaviors. The findings revealed a very strong association between the proportion of long alleles of the DRD4 gene in a population and its prehistorical macro-migration histories. Another quick thing I see that sends off my bullshit alarm is using scientific terms like allele without a basic explanation of what it is. An allele is just a variant of a gene. A simple example is that genes that code for eye color have variants, alleles, for blue, brown, or green, and your eye color is determined by which combination of alleles were passed from your parents to you. Psychologist and reborn writer Shaun says only a small portion of people have this adventure gene, which is why motorcycling will always be a minority pursuit. Some people are born with the adventure gene, but they suppress it, she says. I won't go into the nature versus nurture debate, but the neural network is plastic and can be adapted to our thinking. I'm not saying that if you don't have the gene you can't go riding, but it would be unusual. So the article is saying that there is a dopamine receptor gene variant that's in a minority of the population that has then been linked to increased prehistoric human migration, which is connected to behaviors like seeking new experiences and traveling, which they then credit as driving people to ride motorcycles. That's like a lot of layers of abstraction between those two things. When you take a closer look at the study, and I think it's also important to note that although this article is relatively recent, from 2016, the study is from 1999. I'll talk more about the quality and evolution of our understanding of human genetics later on, but let me just say that we have made a lot of progress since this paper was published.
A DNA strand, like me, is a blueprint for building a living thing. Using sophisticated techniques, thinking machine supercomputers and gene sequencers break down the strand in minutes. and virtual reality displays show our geneticists the gaps in the DNA sequence.
There is a lot of critical context from the authors of the study that is not mentioned in the article at all. Let me give you some highlights. Although the analysis revealed a close association between the DRD4 gene and population migration, the causal relationship between the two is unclear. An equally plausible scenario is that groups migrated not because of the founding fathers' genetic makeup, but due to other causes such as war and the depletion of natural resources. The eventual differences in the allele frequencies of DRD4 between those who migrated and those who did not were a result of natural selection or deselection of the gene over the millennia. One wonders whether a wide variety of other genes might show similarly high levels of association with migration. So the authors of the gene say it's possible the DRD4 gene is involved in the migration, but they also threw out many other causes that have nothing to do with genetics. And of course, the study makes no connection to motorcycles at all. The Moto Writer article and quoted psychologists have taken massive leaps in logic to connect behavior like migration, which happens over hundreds or thousands of years and is also influenced by any number of geopolitical situations, to a single gene variant. What this article does do, though, is get us closer to the core of where these claims of a motorcycle gene come from, this DRD4 variant. Before we dig deep on that gene, though, let's look at the other source study for the claims of genetic affinity for writing. This 2012 Visor Down article spawned at least a dozen 90% copy-pasted versions on a variety of small, shitty motorcycle websites. The source article references a study, yes, with air quotes, published by an insurance company called Bennett's, which claimed that bikers had the matching personality traits associated with the DRD4 variant, which they call the novelty-seeking gene. More air quotes. You get an air quote, you get an air quote. Our research tells us that most bikers were introduced to biking through a family member and that all questions related to the NS gene personality traits, such as being a risk taker and the biker's emotional attachment to his or her bike, resulted in very high scores. This reveals that a majority of biking families will be passing on an NS gene, which in turn is also being reinforced by an environment in which bikers are setting an example and sharing their love of biking. It's certainly in the blood from what I can see. So this is another article where a psychologist has connected novelty-seeking behaviors as defined by this, I'm going to call it a survey because the study seems less accurate for reasons we're going to go into in just a moment. Novelty-seeking traits like risk-taking, low boredom threshold, and spontaneity. And the conclusion from the psychologist is since bikers self-reported having high marks in these behavior traits, and because most motorcycle riders in their survey were introduced to bikes by family members, there is clearly genetic factors at play. Wait, hold the fuck on. Is this the same psychologist from the other article? Oh, it's not. Okay, whew. They are apparently both British though, so that's a connection. And this one was a police psychologist? I wonder if she used the same rigorous analysis techniques to hunt down terrorists. No time to think about that though. If the first major problem one runs into trying to verify any of this is that for the life of me, I could not find the source study anywhere. It's not linked in the Visor Down article, I couldn't find it on the Bennett's website, keyword searches failed me, I don't know what the fuck the deal is here. If I had to guess based on other studies I've seen from insurance companies, it was likely a simple survey of their customers. I have a bit of a rule about self-reported studies where I don't confidently draw broad conclusions about anything from them. That's enough trying to learn from other people's analysis. It's time to find out what the hell science can actually tell us about this DRD4-7R gene. You might have guessed it based on the intuitive naming, but the DR stands for dopamine receptor, and it's often just referred to as D, and then a number afterward. D4 is the fourth gene that has been identified with having some sort of impact on dopamine receptors. The R in 7R stands for repeats, as in how many times does this specific genetic sequence repeat in your genome before becoming something else. The D4 gene has been observed to have 2 to 11 repeats, but 2, 4, 7 are the most common, and they account for what 90% of the population has. It sits on the 11th chromosome near the telomere. That's the tip area at the end here. You know, the part where you wind the chromosome condom down from. I think most people understand that dopamine is a chemical that's involved in making you feel pleasure or satisfaction. Dopamine receptors are part of our central nervous system, the spine and the brain, and they're believed to influence many neurological processes, including motivation, pleasure, cognition, memory, learning, and fine motor control. So it is very plausible that dopamine receptors could play part in human desires to ride a motorcycle. The real question is how much can we isolate genetics as the driving factor in our connection to motorcycles? Now that you know what it does, you might not be surprised at this point to find out that motorcycles are not the only thing that people are claiming confidently that this D47 gene leads to, and yet almost all of it is either overemphasized or premature. ADHD is a condition that's attributed mostly to our biology and is claimed to be influenced by the D47 gene. Several studies across the decades have shown an association between ADHD and this D47 gene, but many others have not, leading meta-analysis to conclude that the connection is probably real, but very small. Un poquito. D4 is one of the most studied genes in connection with psychiatric disorders, and the fact that it has gotten so much attention seems to be the primary reason lots of stuff is being blamed on it, regardless of how tenuous that connection is. That realization led me to question the absolute fundamentals of the arguments people were making in places like the Visor Down article. And that's when I found out that this statistic, that only 20% of the global population has this gene, was really a mischaracterization.
Not everyone has the 7R allele, though. In fact, only about 20% of people do.
20% of you, that may actually be true.
It's because 20% of us are genetically different.
Realizing the truth of this statistic was how I have come to the conclusion that anyone who says that this D47 gene increases the likelihood someone rides a motorcycle in any measurable way is full of shit. Why? Well, it turns out that this 20% global distribution does not mean that it's 20% equally across all populations, all societies, all countries. Quite the fucking opposite, in fact. In the Americas, where motorcycles are a thing, but by no means a common form of transportation, and in fact, it's usually more of a luxury or recreational vehicle, almost 50% of people have this D47 gene variant. But in East and Southeast Asia, where two-wheel motorcycle transportation is far more normalized, the D47 allele was only present in 1.9% of the population. I feel like this fact should have really sent everyone who was making this claim back to the fucking drawing board. Ignorance about genetic cause and effect is not new, and I find it frustrating that even though the science is getting better and more nuanced, people are still treating genetics as if it is destiny. For some people, like the writers of these articles we looked at, it seems like there is a comfort that comes with having a black and white answer for why they make certain decisions in their life, like choosing to ride a motorcycle. When someone says to them, "Oh, you ride motorcycles, isn't that dangerous?" maybe they like to say that it's in my blood. And I would say that this isn't a big deal, except for it lends credibility to other people who attempt to weaponize genetics for their own ideological motives. I've linked several example videos in the description of people debunking a lot of these genetic misconceptions. I find a lot of that content fascinating personally, but the new me is trying to keep my videos focused on motorcycles, so that's as far as we're going. I'm sure a lot of you were as skeptical about this as I was to start, but I'm still glad that you took the time to watch a video that actually lays out the reasons it's bullshit. Because there will inevitably be another study that will be trotted out as evidence of this motorcycle gene, and you'll have a hearty chuckle yourself when you look and, son of a bitch, it's another British person demonstrating they don't know fucking shit about genetics. If this is the first video of mine you've seen, check out my last video summarizing my YouTube career, because you will definitely find something to fill that moist, quivering content hole deep down inside you. Subscribe for more meta motorcycle content like this. I've got some really interesting things I'm working on, and it takes a lot of time, so also make sure you hit that bell, because otherwise you're just very likely to miss my videos. But most importantly of all, ride fast and take chances. I'm at my editing computer, so that must mean I fucking forgot something, which I did. I have a merch store now where I have stuff like that sweater that I wore in this, and stickers that I put on my bike for my legalized lane splitting and legalized wheelies stickers. Everything is like basically the minimum, the absolute minimum I could set the price for, like the minimum amount of profit in order to sell it. So I think it's like a dime usually, it's around there, dime to 25 cents or whatever is what I had to take for most of it. But yeah, it's available if you want some merch. So, and if you think there's anything else that you want that I should add, let me know. And I might add it if I think it's funny enough. Bye.